morning of the 1st of July, we motored out of the harbor in Oslo. Lyra, our Albin Vega sailboat, and the crew, consisting of my girlfriend Gabrielle and I, Pål, are shipshape and ready for 3 weeks of sailing vacation in Scandinavia, meaning Norway, Sweden and Denmark. We're starting our sail trip from Oslo, Norway, and we'll head down the Oslo Fjord. We will cross the border over to Sweden, and our goal is to sail down the Swedish west coast with a few stops along the way. Then head over to Denmark, visit a Danish island, and sail back home again. With the police on our starboard side, we say goodbye to Oslo and head south. When you live at the end of a fjord, you have to sail out of it in order to get to the ocean. It's usually a one long day of sailing with Lyra, but we decided for a smooth start and sailed about halfway until we came to this small island. One thing that is very handy in the Oslo Fjord is that all over the fjord there are these blue buoys that you can tie up to, and you basically just pay a member fee, and then you get this member flag that you hoist up in your rig, and that gives you permission to tie up to one of these buoys where you can spend 24 hours. Next morning, we woke up to a gentle breeze from the north-northwest. With such a good wind, we decided to get out early, so we hoisted all sails and set the course to the south. After about an hour of sailing, we had a wonderful breakfast with some open-faced sandwiches, and right after, we had to dodge a car ferry crossing the fjord. Later on, the wind died down to a light breeze, and we sailed wing on wing, meaning having one sail out on the port side and one to the starboard side. We're cruising down the coast of Norway here. We're in the outer parts of the Oslo Fjord. We've had a northwest wind today, which is about to turn west. You can see that weather coming up there. It's a low pressure system, so we expect some heavier wind and possibly some rain as well. To be on the safe side, we decided to take down the mainsail, and 3 minutes later it hit us full force. Some heavy shit weather here now.
My left leg is bracing one thing. Woo! My right hand is holding dinner.
Glad we got that mainsail down. Luckily we're in sheltered water, so we don't have to deal with the waves, but the rain is just pouring down and really heavy wind as well. You don't really expect these kind of squalls here in Scandinavia, but they do happen. We sailed a couple of more hours that day, almost to the border of Sweden, and we spent the night in a harbor where my cousin lives. Next day, they escorted us out as we were heading further south. Another day at sea, and today the wind has picked up considerably. So we're having a fresh breeze, about 20 knots of wind, I'd say, and we're heading towards Sweden. In the late afternoon, after a fun day of sailing, we crossed the border into Sweden and found a beautiful spot to moor for the night. We are in a very nice anchorage here. I've done a very typical mooring here where we have an anchor out on the stern, and then we are tied up with the bow against a rock wall here. So I just pulled a couple of ropes up on land, tied us to a couple of trees, and it's a very typical way to moor your boat in Scandinavia. Even on my boat, there's a little gap in the front, so it's easy to jump, on and off the bow of the boat. So this island here is actually a naturreservat, natural reserve. So it's a protected area, and sometimes in the summer they have animals going out here, like sheep and cows and so on, to feed on the grass. You have small beaches, and you can go hiking on these islands, and you have great views over the archipelago. You can pick oysters as well. There's some oysters here growing in Scandinavia, so you can go fishing. There's also a lot of mackerel out here, so it's pretty idyllic. Now some might wonder why go to Sweden now during the times of coronavirus. We actually wanted to go to Denmark, but the wind is not very favorable for at least a week, so we didn't just want to wait around for that. We could have gone down the southern coast of Norway, but that potentially means a lot of headwind, and I also think the harbors are going to be packed this summer. Of course, the downside of going here is that we will have to go into a 10-day quarantine when we get back, but probably we're going to make that quarantine on the boat as we sail north again, by just staying on the boat and not being in contact with any people or go into any stores or anything like that. So that's the reason why we chose to sail in Sweden despite of the coronavirus crisis. And it is pretty strange to be here. There are very few boats, very few Norwegian boats this summer, and for instance there's a guest harbor right over here, and in a normal year it would be packed with boats on the outside, but now there's not one single boat on the outside of the dock, only boats on the inside of the dock, which belongs to the locals. So in a normal summer there would be a line of Norwegian boats going down here, but now there's just nobody. So it's kind of a privilege to have all this space to ourselves in the midst of the summer, even though I guess this is not what reminds you of summer weather, but very typical Scandinavian summer weather. As we started to sail down the Swedish west coast, we hoisted the Swedish courtesy flag and began enjoying this pristine stretch of water. To sail in Scandinavia takes a fair amount of map knowledge. These maps are showing a part of the Swedish west coast archipelago. In Norwegian we call it skärgård, which translated means an area of rocks. And there are thousands of them, and a small mistake can lead to a potentially very dangerous situation. Luckily, the waters are well marked with lighthouses, navigational markers on land showing safe passage. Also, there are plenty of red and green buoys and these cardinal marks, but they aren't much worth if you don't know on which side you're supposed to sail. We continued on south along the Swedish coast and we were looking for a blue buoy to tie up to. We know this coastline pretty well and aimed for one next to an island with a beach. The blue buoy concept is the same here as it is in Norway. Also, it was time for a bath. 3 days without a shower, it's time to jump in.
Oh, it's colder here. It's colder. It's colder. It's colder.
Luckily, we have the dinghy, so we can do some exploring. We also enjoy having small barbecues. Tonight, it was grilled hot dogs with vegetables from our garden at home. Simple food for the simple life. In this nature reserve, because a lot of people use these areas, they have these small huts where they have room for garbage. And then there are very primitive restrooms, like for example in this one, where you have 2 seats next to each other. Very practical, you know, you can just sit next to each other and have a chat, and it can all be done very efficiently. The next day we only sailed for about 1 hour to the small town of Buvallstrand. There was a storm warning, and with these kinds of winds we did not want to be out there risking the boat and ourselves. One thing's for sure, we don't want to end up as this sailboat. It turned out they had made a poor judgment of the weather, and in their attempt to sail from Skagen, the very tip of Denmark, and over to the Swedish coast, they had been overwhelmed by heavy weather and had their front sail ripped into pieces. The engine was also barely working, and without any sails up, they had held on and barely managed to navigate between the rocks of the archipelago and into sheltered waters. The crew was both terrified and exhausted, so we gave them a hand to help them get tied up to the docks. However, for us, it served as a great reminder that days like this are best spent in a harbor. Located about halfway between Gothenburg and the border to Norway, you find Buvallstrand with its 446 inhabitants. One of many idyllic villages along the Swedish west coast and a popular sailing destination for Scandinavians. Historically in this village, they lived of selling herring and exporting Bohuslän granite, both of which there is an abundance in this area. A lot of the architecture from 1800s and early 1900s is still existing, and it's a place that oozes of maritime culture and history, such as here in the Skipper Street, the Fisherman Street, or the Sailor Street. And down by the harbor, the old red houses that were owned by the fishermen are still standing just as they were 100 years ago. What we could not fish for ourselves in Buvallstrand, we got from the well-stocked local fish store. Smoked mackerel, pickled herring, shrimps, crabs, and much more. To stretch our legs, we climbed to the top of a granite mountain where we could enjoy the view and lean on the strong winds. Then after 2 relaxing days in Buvallstrand, waiting for the wind to die down, we could continue our journey south. We left early on the morning of day 6. The sea was still in an uproar after several days of heavy wind, and we were doing around 5 knots with only half of the front sail out. So since the waves are pretty big out in the ocean today, it's very handy that here and there you have these canals that you can go through, and we're in what I would believe is the longest one along the Swedish west coast. And a bit further down we will have to go by a bridge that will hopefully open for us. And this is a really beautiful landscape that we motored through here. The Soten Canal was dug out between 1931 and 35. It's almost 5 kilometers long and has a depth of 4.5 meters. It's much used, and over 50,000 boats pass through it every year. Most of them are pleasure boats like ours. About halfway, there's a drawbridge that is operated from early morning until the evening. You just have to wait for the green light. There are many cabins along the canal, and it's well marked with red and green markers. Once out of the canal and a bit further south, the ocean came straight at us, and it became quite a bumpy ride with some large swells, making Lyra into a roller coaster. However, with the right amount of sail up, we felt safe even though we were tossed around for a few hours. In the late evening, we reached a blue buoy just outside of the city of Lysekil. We were greeted by 2 swans, and we enjoyed an epic sunset from deck, feeling grateful for another great day at sea. On day 7, the wind was even stronger than the day before. But luckily it came from the northwest and pushed us down the coast. It's not a windy day at sea. Not many sailboats out today, but there's one beautiful one coming up here. Every now and then we got some lee from the wind behind small islands, and after having sailed a strenuous 30 nautical miles that day, we found a nice spot to tie up for the night. After about a week of sailing now and not having the best conditions, it's either been too much wind or too little wind. Today it's just perfect. It's about 18 knots of wind coming straight from the northwest, gently pushing us down the Swedish coast. Not so far from Gothenburg actually right now. Our aim is to sail by Gothenburg and down to a Swedish town that is called Varberg. With ideal conditions, we glided down the coast in a way that we would call smooth sailing. There were a lot of other boats out, and we could see Gothenburg from a distance. We had to dodge a few big ships on our way, but after that, all we had to do was to sit back, have some good food, enjoy the sun and the wind, and let the autopilot do the job. It's days like this that we enjoy the most. We found a nice spot for Lyra in Varberg, overlooking the city in the back, and spent a couple of days having barbecues on the beach, enjoying some calm summer nights, and some cool wildlife like this cormorant battling with an eel just next to our boat. We had some nice days in Varberg, and on day 11 we sailed out again. There's not much of an archipelago at this stretch of the coast, so we decided to start crossing over to Denmark. After a long day at sea, we enjoyed the spectacular evening, including a double rainbow, making up a promising sign for the rest of the trip. But more about that in the next part, when we sail with dolphins, head to a remote Danish island, walk in a desert, and after that, start sailing back to Oslo again.